It all began with a note. Debbie sat in the staff room on a plastic stool, her back against the cold wall. In her hand, she held a white napkin. The hastily scrawled lines in a child's handwriting were etched into her memory. "My name is Alice, Alice Littman. Please help me. I'm in danger." The excessive exclamation marks made the message scream for attention. It was a cry for help. Debbie immediately knew who had left the note. That very girl. She was hot-tempered, thin, pale, and beautiful, with long chocolate-colored hair tied in a low ponytail and big brown eyes. She was about 12. Debbie had noticed her the moment she entered the cafe, accompanied by her parents. They arrived late, almost at closing time. Alice's parents were obviously well off, which Debbie could tell not only from their appearance but their demeanor. The man exuded an air of superiority and arrogance, while his wife looked down on others with contempt. They were the kind of wealthy people who always seemed dissatisfied with the service or the food quality. Debbie had been a waitress at this cafe for almost 7 years, and that time had taught her a lot about people. When your salary depends on it, you learn quickly. Any mistake could lead to a complaint, jeopardizing her monthly bonus. Every penny mattered to Debbie. The quiet girl followed her parents. Debbie thought it was strange. Usually, children and parents walk together, or they let their children go first. After all, this is a family cafe. The woman had seen many families, and here the daughter walked behind her parents, silent, indifferent, like a shadow. Once the family settled at a table in the center of the room, Debbie approached to offer the menu. The father acknowledged her without making eye contact. Respecting their space, Debbie stepped back, knowing they would call her when ready to order. As closing time was nearing, she had numerous tasks left, including wiping down the bar and restocking the shelves. However, her attention was drawn to the new customers. The woman immediately noticed that the girl was dressed a little too strangely. Despite the summer heat of July, the girl was dressed as if it were fall, wearing long, dark baggy pants, sneakers, and a long-sleeved t-shirt. Could it be a fashion trend with teenagers these days? No, it didn't seem so, Debbie mused, having encountered countless adolescents. Contrarily, during summer, girls of this age usually accentuate their youth and beauty with more revealing and form-fitting attire. There are, of course, adherents of various subcultures, though Debbie wasn't particularly knowledgeable about them. But Alice didn't seem to belong to any of these groups either. Typically, nonconformist teenagers accessorize with symbolic trinkets, dye their hair vibrant colors, and apply bold makeup. Debbie was open-minded about such expressions, thinking youth is the best time to experiment with one's appearance. However, Alice seemed to resemble a nun more than a teenager. She wore closed black clothing, absent any makeup, and her gaze was blank, mostly directed downwards. Alice lacked the usual youthful energy, cheerfulness, and curiosity. Debbie wondered if the girl was ill. She had encountered children with special needs before. The father of the family ordered coffee for himself and his wife, a milkshake for their daughter, and pancakes with fruit fillings for the whole family. They ate dinner quickly. Debbie, an onlooker, was engrossed in her own world but kept stealing glances at the family. She was particularly interested in the girl, who ate her pancakes without much enthusiasm. It appeared as though she was eating out of necessity rather than pleasure, her pale, pretty face devoid of any emotion. Her parents conversed and even smiled among themselves, but they never addressed their daughter as if she didn't exist. Debbie slightly empathized with the girl. Her own father was the same, indifferent, cold, and disinterested in his only daughter's life. However, Debbie's mother made up for the lack of attention from him. She would listen to Debbie, comfort her, and shower her with love when needed. Despite her demanding work schedule, Debbie's mother always knew when her daughter needed support. Debbie, in her 40s, struggled to accept her passing. Her father, who lives in another city with a new family, has always been distant and is now completely out of touch. It felt as if they weren't related. Debbie didn't have any regret, likely because she never had a close relationship with her father. In this family that visited the cafe before closing time, both parents were cold and distant towards their daughter. During dinner, the father only acknowledged his daughter when she accidentally knocked his coffee cup, spilling a few drops. The girl recoiled, anticipating punishment, a fear evident in her tense, slender shoulders. The father scolded her harshly, looking at her as if she were a repugnant insect rather than his child. The mother chided, "There you go, ruining everything again, clumsy girl. Rude parents. What can I say? You can't choose your mother and father. You're simply dealt a hand and must learn to live with it. It can be worse. Orphanages are full of children, with countless street children wandering aimlessly. Similarly, marginalized families exist where young ones endure hardships. This girl, at least, does not starve or wear rags," Debbie thought. After their meal, the family exited the cafe in the same order they had arrived, parents leading with their daughter following like a pale shadow. Debbie shut the door behind them. The cafe was now closed. It was a family establishment, not a night bar. Drained from a long day of serving customers, Debbie stretched and sighed with relief. All that was left to do was tidy up, sweep, pick up any litter, and then she could head home. At home, a comfortable sofa, a soft plaid blanket, and her beloved cats, Red Pancake and White Marshmallow, awaited her. Debbie hadn't started a family of her own by the time she reached her 40s, but this didn't bother her. However, learning that she would never become a mother was a shock. She had loved children from a young age and had often fantasized about having several of her own, even pre-selecting their names. Despite this blow, Debbie found other joys in life. Debbie, who loved children immensely, worked at a family cafe. Her warm smile drew the young clients, and she quickly became their favorite waitress. She would joke when needed, calm them down, or encourage them to eat a healthier but less appetizing dish. Parents regularly left compliments for Debbie, which she appreciated. After cleaning all the tables, Debbie noticed a napkin with some words left by the last customers. It was a message scrawled in red pencil. The cafe provided colored pencils and paper for the children to draw. However, this girl had chosen to use a napkin, which could easily be hidden under the spice rack. Debbie read the alarming text and shivered. The girl wasn't ill. She was in danger and needed help. From the start, Debbie had sensed something unusual about her. One idea came to mind: contacting the police. But something told Debbie her report might not be taken seriously. She wasn't one to cause a scene or insist on having her way. Even though, at 40, it might be time to learn. Debbie wasn't scared of being ridiculed by the police. She was more concerned about what would happen if they didn't believe her. She couldn't abandon the child. Debbie knew she couldn't live peacefully if she didn't find Alice. She would always think about the girl's vacant gaze and her frail figure. How could she live knowing a child was suffering somewhere, a child who had sought her help? Debbie quickly finished her business at the cafe, hailed a cab, and went to the police station. However, as she had anticipated, they did not take her seriously. "She's just messing with you," the investigator said, grinning wearily. "I have a daughter the same age. She's always concocting stories from watching soap operas." "You don't understand," Debbie protested. The girl didn't appear to be joking. She looked terrified. "Well, she's a good actress then," the uniformed man retorted, clearly eager to dismiss the bothersome visitor. "Still, you should take a statement and investigate her family." "On what grounds?" he challenged. "Have you personally seen any abuse or insults directed at this child?" Debbie reluctantly shook her head. She was starting to realize the futility of her attempts to convince the dismissive officer. "Take another look at the note. It's a cry for help." "It's a silly prank," he countered, shaking his head dismissively. "I have more pressing matters to deal with than this note. What am I supposed to do?" Debbie muttered in confusion. "Go home," replied the investigator, "and throw away that paper on your way. Forget about this case. Teenagers are often unpredictable. I could tell you many stories about their peculiar behavior, but I don't have the time." Debbie walked slowly through the late-night city. It was nearing midnight. Her legs ached with fatigue, but she was consumed by one thought: how to save the girl. Could this note on a napkin be Alice's last cry for help? It was clear that Alice hid the note from her abusive parents. What was happening behind their closed doors? What kind of suffering was this child enduring? Was the policeman right in dismissing it as a prank? Were the parents cold to Alice as a punishment for a similar act? Debbie wanted so badly to believe that this was a joke, but she saw the look in the girl's eyes. It was difficult to ignore. The child was miserable, deeply unhappy. "I guess I'll have to call Nolan," Debbie thought. "Yes, it is a tough decision, but what else can be done? I need peace in my heart by any possible means. Nolan will certainly help. He's the only one among my acquaintances with that capability." Nolan used to be the closest person to her. It seems amusing now, but years ago she deemed him flawless. He appeared to be the perfect guy, tall, athletic, ambitious. They met at the store where Debbie was a clerk. It was a small store offering various items: food, household chemicals, and stationery, everyday items that neighborhood residents might need at any moment. Nolan was one such resident. He often came to the store for cigarettes, beer, or frozen dumplings. Debbie found this cheerful young man endearing. He was always jovial, respectful, and dressed neatly and stylishly. Sometimes Nolan visited the store alone, sometimes with his friends. Debbie noticed that he didn't have a girlfriend, which pleased her, though she couldn't understand why. One day, Nolan entered the store in high spirits. Debbie didn't mind his cheerful demeanor. He asked her to weigh a few kilos of potatoes. As she was doing so, he revealed some news. "Don't mind me, but I'm a bit tipsy, but not a drunkard. Today I found out I'm being promoted. I've been waiting for this for a long time," Nolan explained. "I never thought badly of you." "Congratulations," Debbie responded. "Ever since I was a kid, I've dreamed of working for the police, catching criminals and the like. Everyone told me it wouldn't work out due to my health and my father's history. He spent his life in prison. I barely knew him. Despite this, I graduated from police school, worked at a precinct for a couple of years in a low position, and today they handed me the order and gave me my rank. There were no other customers in the store, so Debbie listened to Nolan without rush. She found it pleasant to converse with him and interesting to learn about his personal life. Nolan had a dream, and it had finally come true. It's wonderful when dreams come true. If you want something bad enough, it always happens, Debbie smiled. "And you?" Nolan asked, peering intently into the young saleswoman's eyes. Debbie's heart fluttered, goosebumps spreading down her spine. "Do you also dream of something?" Debbie felt a rush of confusion. Yes, she had a cherished dream, but to reveal it to tipsy Nolan felt too personal. Debbie lived alone. Her father had moved to another city, starting a new family. Her mother was no longer around, having suffered a sudden heart attack at work. At that time, Debbie was studying to be a history teacher. She loved children and had a knack for connecting with them. It was her mother's advice that led her to pursue a career in teaching. "You are born to be a teacher," her mother often said. Someone like you should definitely work in a school." Debbie nodded in agreement. Her mother was right. After her father left, Debbie struggled. Money was scarce. Her mother had to support her daughter on her own. Debbie's father had faithfully paid child support until his daughter turned 18. Then all assistance ceased. Debbie felt for her mother and tried to help wherever she could. She even considered dropping out of college to work. However, her mother insisted, "Don't even think about it. We'll manage. How much longer do you have left in school? Finish your degree, become a teacher, a respected person. You won't have to toil and ruin your health like I did." Debbie decided to become not just a teacher, but the best teacher, and repay her mother for all her efforts. Sadly, her mother passed away during Debbie's third year of study. Debbie suddenly found herself alone in the world. She had to leave college to support herself and took a job as a clerk in a local store. Thoughts of lost opportunities, an education, a career as a teacher, all faded against the backdrop of the grief that had befallen Debbie. The wedding was modest, without the typical feast in a cafe or a crowd of guests. Debbie simply had no one to invite, and Nolan didn't desire a lavish celebration. However, his mother organized a small celebration for the couple. She invited them to her home and prepared a spread of homemade delicious food and appetizers. The celebration was a close-knit family affair attended by the newlyweds, Nolan's brothers with their families, and Nolan's mother. Everyone expressed their wishes for the couple to have children as soon as possible and as many as they could. Nolan and Debbie, who had already discussed the topic, also yearned to become parents. "We will definitely have a son," Nolan dreamt. "I will be a real father to him and spend all my time with him. We'll be best friends." Debbie smiled softly. She understood Nolan's deep yearning for a son. He wanted to provide everything he never had, especially a caring and attentive father. This desire warmed Debbie's heart as she also dreamt of having children. However, the much-anticipated pregnancy did not occur. Initially, they didn't worry about that, attributing it to their busy work schedules and their efforts in setting up their home. But as years passed without any sign of an heir, Debbie began to panic. She resisted seeing a doctor, fearing a serious diagnosis. Nolan, on the other hand, remained optimistic. "You're always screwing yourself up," he reassured his wife. "Maybe all you need are just some pills. Anything can be treated these days." At the women's clinic, she underwent numerous tests and dutifully complied with all requirements. The blood results were almost perfect. However, an ultrasound revealed an unexpected issue. Debbie had a congenital anomaly of the pelvic organs. It didn't affect her daily life, but it prevented her from becoming a mother. "What should I do?" Debbie sobbed in the doctor's office. A middle-aged woman regarded her sympathetically. "Dear, don't be upset. Medical science is constantly advancing. Perhaps one day, surgical procedures to correct such conditions will be possible. But for now, your only option is surrogacy." Upon hearing this, Debbie felt relief. She smiled and thanked the doctor. If there was a chance, she would definitely seize it. But at home, Debbie studied all the options and concluded that it wasn't right for them. The cost was prohibitive, the risks were high, and there were too many uncertainties. She had heard stories of women refusing to return the child to their parents. The primary obstacle, however, was financial. She and Nolan simply didn't have the necessary funds. So, the woman resigned herself to the fact that their dream would never come true. That same evening, Debbie shared her findings with her husband. He appeared confused, a look she had never seen on him since they met. She knew he was grappling with the same thoughts she had. They had been dreaming, planning, and hoping, and now this. The woman wanted the usual comfort from Nolan. She longed for his hug, his soothing words, the stroke of her hair. But instead, he said, "I need to be alone," and retreated to the bedroom. Debbie was left alone with her worries in the living room. They didn't discuss it further, and continued living by inertia. They went to work, shared meals, and watched TV together in the evenings. But there was a tension between the couple that was very hard on both of them. Debbie visited several more doctors. Their verdict was unanimous. She would not be able to carry a baby naturally, and nothing could be done about it. Debbie gradually came to terms with it, although it was difficult. Nolan appeared to have accepted reality as well. He joked and smiled again, but he no longer spoke about plans and generally seemed colder. Debbie missed their once easy and light relationship. Trust, warmth, a future filled with children's laughter were gone. One day, Debbie suggested adopting a child from an orphanage. Well, that's an option too. There are many orphans in orphanages who need parental support. Why not make a destitute child happy? No way. Nolan shook his head. I don't want to raise the offspring of an alcoholic or a criminal. It's all about genes, you know. They can manifest themselves at any moment. My mother was worried about me and my brothers all my life. We're lucky we didn't take after our father. What if we're unlucky? Debbie didn't argue, acknowledging that such an important decision should be made together. Despite Nolan's stance, Debbie remained hopeful that she might change his mind someday. Then something unexpected happened that shook Debbie's world. Nolan, who often worked late, returned home one evening with a peculiar look. Debbie immediately noticed the joy in his eyes and the smile he tried to conceal. Did something happen? Debbie asked, thinking her husband had either received another promotion or had solved a long-standing case. But she had no idea what she would hear in response to her question. We need to have a serious talk, Nolan announced. The joy in his eyes faded, and his face became serious and difficult to read. His discomfort around Debbie was palpable and unnerving. What is it? Debbie asked, looking at her husband with worry. Let's sit down, shall we? Nolan, periodically confused and averting his eyes, told her everything. About his worries, about unfulfilled dreams of children, about the fatigue of physical and emotional strain, and about the cooling of feelings for the woman who once seemed the closest and dearest. At that difficult moment, 2 students were sent to the precinct for practical training. The guy was assigned to the homicide department, while the girl, Linda, was attached to Nolan because he had much routine paperwork. Linda was quite attractive, but Nolan was solely focused on his work until she confessed her love to him. He tried to explain to Linda that they were not a suitable match. He suggested she should seek someone younger, more promising, and unmarried. But Linda was persistent, firmly pursuing her goal. Eventually, Nolan succumbed to her persistence. Debbie listened to her husband and felt her world crumble. She had trusted Nolan more than she had trusted herself. She had thought they were just going through a rough patch in their relationship, but he had felt like he was caught between 2 fires for months. Nolan confessed. He looked unhappy, as if he had been deceived and betrayed, not that he had done it himself. Perhaps his conscience prevented him from expressing joy openly. Thank you for being honest, Debbie replied, striving to maintain a steady, calm voice. Why are you sharing this now? Have you made a decision? Debbie hoped for an apology, for him to admit his mistakes, express remorse, and seek forgiveness. Of course, she would forgive him. It might take time to restore their relationship, but they would manage. After all, everyone makes mistakes. However, today, Linda told me something. Nolan began, heaving a sigh. She's expecting a baby. Can you believe it? A happy smile then spread across his face, illuminating it with warmth. He straightened his posture as if shrugging off the weight of guilt. Upon hearing this, Debbie felt a sharp pain in her chest and gasped for breath. "Go away," she said quietly. "What?" Nolan didn't hear her. "Get out of here." Nolan nodded, then looked anxiously at Debbie. "Are you sure you're going to be okay? Do you think I'm going to harm myself because of you?" Debbie retorted, a grim smile playing on her lips. Those were the exact thoughts that crossed her mind initially. "I'm so guilty. You're nice. You don't deserve someone like me." Debbie wanted to hit him, but instead, she turned around and walked into the other room. "You can pick your stuff up tomorrow when I'm at work," she said before leaving. After Nolan left, Debbie sobbed for a long time, her face buried in his sweater. It was the one she'd taken to work that morning, a memento of her husband for some reason. She wanted to keep at least one of Nolan's belongings. Perhaps she still loved him despite his betrayal. Now divorced, Debbie found herself alone in her apartment. To combat loneliness, she adopted 2 cats, one from a shelter and the other a skinny, malnourished stray with infected eyes. Nursing the stray back to health took time, but it was worth it. Debbie also left her job, unable to bear working at the store where she had met Nolan. The memories were too painful. Instead, she found work as a waitress at a family-friendly cafe, serving customers who came in to share stories, jokes, and order treats. The variety of faces, stories, and situations reminded her that she was not alone and provided a welcome distraction. She dealt with little visitors who refused to eat, wouldn't sit still, and were just in a bad mood. Debbie had a way with children, always knowing what to say to brighten their day. Nolan, on the other hand, married Linda and bought a spacious apartment in a prestigious neighborhood with a mortgage. Soon, he became a father to a long-awaited, much-desired son. He was a devoted father who kept his promises. Debbie occasionally ran into her ex-husband with his son at various places: an amusement park, a shopping center. Nolan, leading his son by the hand, radiated happiness and pride. Fatherhood suited him well. Debbie avoided running into her ex-husband, steering clear whenever she spotted him from a distance. The encounters were too painful, too awkward. After the divorce, Nolan offered his support should she ever need it. The woman nodded in response, knowing she would never reach out to him. She didn't want his help born out of guilt or pity. But now, the only person who could help her was Nolan. His profession in the police force made him the best person to turn to for her current predicament. Debbie decided to wait until morning. It was late, and she didn't want to disturb Nolan. As dawn broke, she gathered her courage and dialed her ex-husband's number. "Hello, Nolan," she began, her voice trembling as she heard her once-beloved's voice. "I think I finally need your help." "Sure, come over. I'm at work now. I'll ask them to let you in to see me." Nolan had changed slightly for the better. His hair had started to gray, and his eyes had acquired a peaceful look. He smiled at Debbie, rising from his chair. His charming, wide smile once gave Debbie shivers. Now, she found it pleasing to see Nolan like this, smiling and friendly. There was no awkwardness, tension, anger, or resentment. Their meeting had started quite differently than Debbie had imagined, as if 2 friends had accidentally bumped into each other after a long separation. Initially, they chatted about life. Nolan had become a father to 2 children, and recently a daughter had been added to his family. Debbie was sincerely happy for her ex-husband. It was precisely what he had always wanted. "So, what happened to you?" Nolan's eyes suddenly turned serious and attentive. "You need my help, don't you?" Debbie nodded and relayed the previous day's events to Nolan. She also showed him the note left by the girl, which she now kept securely in her purse as a reminder that all that had transpired was not a dream. Nolan scrutinized the hastily scribbled pencil letters. Most likely, this child is being bullied by her parents, if they are her parents at all and not kidnappers. I'll pull the security tapes right now and find out who these people are. We'll get to the bottom of this. Thank you. Debbie sincerely thanked Nolan. His support and understanding comforted her, making her regret her initial fear of approaching her ex-spouse. Nolan called after 24 hours. Well, he went straight to the point. We found out who these people are. It's the Lipmans. They run a small dairy plant, but their products are sold around the city and are considered excellent. Ray Littman was a wealthy citizen, especially by their city's standards. He was a respected man who regularly made charitable contributions and participated in campaigns to help the poor. He was an entrepreneur who successfully managed his factory while paying great attention to the quality of his dairy products. Furthermore, he was a frequent topic in the local press and an exemplary family man. Ray Littman preferred to keep his family private, explaining that he didn't want any of his household to suffer from excessive attention. But, of course, Nolan found out all about it. The wife, Kathleen, was a middle-aged woman who had survived a difficult marriage. The woman, originally from a poor family, was once classmates with Ray Littman, who harbored an unrequited love for her. Kathleen was the most popular girl in school, and Ray, who lacked both physical attractiveness and other merits, could only dream of her. As time passed, life sorted things out. Ray Littman, known for his academic diligence, natural ingenuity, and incredible persistence, established his own dairy business, becoming wealthy and renowned. Kathleen, the girl who once filled the future businessman's thoughts, gambled on her beauty and lost. After a string of romances and endless dates, she found herself alone with a newborn daughter. The baby's father disappeared without acknowledging his child or contributing to her upbringing. Kathleen raised her daughter alone. A chance encounter brought Kathleen and Ray together again. Whether the man's feelings reignited or never faded, he proposed to his former classmate. She accepted his proposal eagerly, like a lifeline, and so they formed a family. Ray, his school love, and her daughter Alice, who was just starting first grade. At first, everything was fine, but as Alice entered pre-puberty, she developed a disease which can occur sometimes. The girl was diagnosed with a psychiatric condition, pulled out of school, and started homeschooling. But she doesn't seem sick, Debbie objected. Sure she was, but not ill. She was smart, insightful. Well, you're not a psychiatrist, Nolan retorted. I've seen a lot. Sometimes these things are completely invisible in people until they have an attack of aggression or delusions. It's scary. I don't know. Your note is just a manifestation of her illness. Alice Littman is seriously ill. Look, her father is exemplary. They dress, feed, and take care of her. She regularly sees rehabilitology. Littman does not skimp on this. She often travels with her parents. She's doing well. There's no reason to interfere with this family, legally speaking. So, I did the best I could. Thank you. Debbie thanked her ex-husband. She found it hard to believe the information he had shared. It all seemed like a beautiful facade with unknown realities hidden behind it. Although Alice might be sick, it was clear that she was unhappy with her family and deeply afraid of her parents. Nolan, can you please give me their home address? She asked. Why do you need it? Nolan responded with caution. You're not planning to spy on them, are you? No, not at all. I just want to see the girl one more time, at least a glimpse, to confirm that I've imagined it all. That haunted look in her eyes, the fear lurking beneath. This is strange, but fine. Write it down, please. Be careful, and call me right away if there's any trouble. An hour later, Debbie found herself standing in front of the Littman mansion. She had the day off and decided to use her spare time to visit. The two-story cottage was located in an upscale residential area, surrounded by similar homes and imposing estates with ornate rooftops and annexes. The Littman mansion was relatively modest in comparison, but was beautiful, stylish, and inviting. It appeared to house a model family. Rather than being enclosed by a solid fence, the house had a metal fence that allowed a clear view of the garden, swimming pool, children's playground with swings and slides, and a gazebo, paradise for a child. Any child protection service would see this spectacle and never suspect that a girl living in such conditions might need help. Alice was in danger. Debbie was convinced. Nolan's convincing story was not credible. Debbie, unsure of her next move, lingered near the house, feeling at least this way she was closer to Alice. As the woman was about to leave, the cottage door swung open. On the porch stood the girl who had written the note on the napkin, looking as vulnerable and fragile as ever. Despite the sweltering heat of a sunny July day, she wore a baggy sweater and jeans, an odd choice when shorts and a top would have been more logical. Debbie called out to Alice, who initially recoiled in surprise before recognizing her. Alice hurried towards the fence, occasionally glancing back at her house, seemingly to check if she was being watched. "You're the waitress from the cafe. You found my note." Alice initiated the conversation. "Yes," Debbie replied. "What's happening to you? Did someone finally believe me?" Alice clung to the bars of the fence. "I've left similar messages before, at vacation spots, at local cafes, but no one ever showed interest. I guess they didn't believe me. You're the first. Tell me what's going on and how I can help you," Debbie urged. "I'll tell you, but you probably won't believe me. My stepfather and mother make everything seem like my fault because I'm supposedly crazy. I have an official diagnosis, so whatever I say, people usually interpret it as a delusion, as a manifestation of illness," the girl told. Debbie noted that she spoke eloquently, like an adult, illiterate person. Alice appeared clear-headed and aware, not at all like a sick teenager. "I believe you, I do. Don't worry. I wouldn't be here if I didn't. It took me some effort to find your house. You didn't leave an address. I didn't have the time. They're always watching me when we're in public, both of them. I had a hard time writing that note and leaving it. I took a risk. If my stepfather had seen it, he would have locked me up for months, maybe even forbidden me to go to the garden. It's happened before, and now they won't notice you. Now, won't they punish you for talking to me, a stranger? Now is this good a time as any?" The girl smiled. "Only the servants are home, but they're busy with the cleaning. The house's windows don't overlook this lot, and my parents aren't here. My stepfather is at work, and my mother has gone to the spa and won't be back until late. It's a good time to talk." "Tell me about it," Debbie asked. "Do you mind if I turn on the video recording? I might need proof. I can't do much on my own, but I have a friend in the police force. He needs hard evidence to take action." "A friend in the police force? That's great," the girl responded. "That gives me hope. Regarding the camera, I was going to suggest that myself. If the police don't help you, you could post it online or involve the press." Debbie, struck again by the girl's choice of words, switched on her phone's camera. "I'm Alice Littman," the girl began, looking into the lens. "I'm being bullied by my parents. I need your help. Now I will tell my story from the beginning." Alice lived in a small, cramped one-bedroom apartment with her mother, Kathleen. Their home was in an old 5-story house on the outskirts of town, backing onto a vacant lot in a highway. Money was always tight as Kathleen, who disliked working, only took on jobs sporadically, and it depressed Kathleen, who had dreamed of a more glamorous life since high school and believed she deserved it. In her youth, Kathleen was a true beauty, and she maintained an attractive appearance into adulthood. She was tall, slender, and had captivating eyes. Both in school and now, she had many admirers. However, Kathleen was rarely satisfied with these suitors, as they were all as financially challenged as she was. The places where Kathleen lived and worked were far from affluent, so princes in white Mercedes were hardly ever seen. Despite living in squalid conditions with mold on the walls, cockroaches, rusty furniture, dilapidated plumbing, and scarce food, Alice felt happy. She found her freedom in playing all day in the yard with neighborhood kids, inventing games, laughing, and climbing trees. Alice adored her mother, whom she perceived as the most beautiful woman in the world. Kathleen equally loved Alice and cared for her in her own way. However, Kathleen often broke down and cried after successive personal failures. During these times, she would blame Alice with words that the young girl couldn't comprehend. "It's all your fault. If I hadn't had you, I would have been married to a decent man by now. Who needs me with you?" These words made Alice feel guilty, even though she didn't understand how to help her mother or fix the situation. Thankfully, these episodes were rare and short-lived. Kathleen would quickly revert to her usual self, remaining cheerful and up for an adventure. Alice's mother would sometimes dress her up, apply makeup, and call her a beauty and a doll. The girl was delighted, happy that she could please her mother in some way. "As you grow up, you'll become beautiful. We'll marry you off to a rich man, and we won't need any more. Just don't repeat my mistakes and settle for less. I'll be there to help, advise, and guide you. I've become wiser now." At the time, Alice was only 6 to 7 years old. She didn't understand what her mother was saying, but she nodded and smiled, eager to please her. And then, Ray Littman appeared in her mother's life. At first, the man liked Alice. He smiled at the girl often, bought her toys and sweets, and treated her mother very well, like a princess of some kind. Kathleen blossomed beside him, became even more beautiful, even more charming, and her eyes shone with some special light. She looked at Ray with such adoration and such hope. It was later that Alice would realize that he was just pretending to be kind. "Ree and I are getting married," a joyful Kathleen told her daughter. "He proposed. Now he will be your father. We're moving far from here to his beautiful house. You'll have your own room, your own bed, just like a princess, and so many toys." It all seemed like a fairy tale to Alice. She could hardly imagine this house, this garden, even though her mother described it in vivid detail. Alice's life changed dramatically. Adjusting to the surrounding opulence took time. She had her own room with a pink canopy bed and shelves full of new toys. There was a pool in the garden for her to splash around in, along with swings and roundabouts. Uniformed staff served her extravagant meals for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. The abundance was dizzying. Overwhelmed by the sudden changes, Alice often found herself exhausted and asleep by 8 or 9 p.m. in her princess bed. Despite her new life, Alice still felt a sense of lack. Firstly, she yearned for freedom. It wasn't customary to venture beyond the fence here, yet she longed to explore the neighborhood. However, it wasn't allowed. Secondly, Alice deeply missed her friends, the boys and girls she had grown up with. One day, she asked her mother if she could invite them over, even if just for a day. "What?" Kathleen exclaimed. "Forget your street friends. You'll soon make new friends from respectable families." Kathleen had changed significantly. She had become so beautiful and radiant that it was difficult to take one's eyes off her. She now frequented beauty parlors and gyms. She had made friends with other beautiful and well-groomed women, often spending time in cafes, shopping, or just strolling together. She seemed happy and often voiced that she was finally living the life she deserved. During this period, Kathleen paid little attention to Alice. She used to get home only by the time Ree returned from work, and then all her attention was focused on him, which he seemed to enjoy. Alice no longer received love. She was cared for by a nanny who had a strict and slightly harsh demeanor. Although Alice was afraid of her, she obeyed her unconditionally. The nanny prepared Alice for school, teaching her letters and numbers and having her practice writing in her copybooks. Then, Alice was enrolled in a prestigious, albeit expensive, school. The students spent their entire day within the institution's walls, attending lessons, resting, and participating in extra classes. Alice quickly befriended her classmates. Initially, they seemed strange to her, too quiet and too boring, unlike her friends from the yard, whom she missed terribly. She was surprised that these children were unfamiliar with basic games like tag and trick-filled hide and seek. After teaching them, Alice's new friends were utterly delighted. From then on, she became a sort of leader, always coming up with fun activities that her friends eagerly participated in. However, Alice's excessive initiative often got her into trouble with teachers and educators. They preferred dealing with calm, obedient children and offered board games or sculpting classes between lessons. But they had already gotten a taste for a very different kind of entertainment. They were just kids. During one game of dodgeball that started in the school corridor, a boy accidentally broke a glass cabinet filled with the school students' awards with his ball. Shards flew everywhere, one injuring a girl. The injury was not serious, but it took a while to stop the bleeding in the infirmary. A massive scandal broke out. The parents of the injured student were angry. They couldn't believe the administration at such a prestigious and expensive school could fail to ensure their children's safety. The principal berated Alice in his office. He accused Alice of being a bad influence on the other children and called her a savage. Then, while Alice was still there, he called her father Ree and requested a serious discussion. Alice sat nervously outside the principal's office on a couch. Ree and Kathleen hurriedly approached the office. Seeing them, Alice initially felt a surge of relief. They were her family, after all. But Ree gave her such an icy stare that it made her even more frightened. Kathleen, her mother, didn't even look at Alice. She appeared pale, anxious, and guilty. Alice couldn't hear what the adults were discussing. The ride home was silent, with her mother occasionally glaring at her with a mixture of irritation and disappointment. Alice felt as if she wanted to disappear. At home, Ree struck the girl. It was the first instance, but not the last. He brutally lashed out at Alice with a belt, targeting her arms and legs. The strikes left red welts on her skin, but that didn't deter him. "You're an ungrateful wild brat," Ray Littman exclaimed. "I've had to endure so much criticism because of you. You're a spoiled, disobedient child. But don't worry, I'll discipline you. There's no room for savages in my house." The experience was painful, distressing, and frightful. Ray firmly held Alice as she squirmed, but she couldn't evade the blows. The intense pain blurred her vision. Alice's mother stood by, making no attempt to defend her daughter. Instead, when the ordeal was over, she comforted Ray, not her beaten child. The following day, Alice didn't attend school due to a fever. The weekend that followed gave her time to recover. Neither her mother nor Ree showed any sympathy. They barely communicated with Alice, which was also part of the punishment. On Monday, Alice went to school in pants and a long-sleeved blouse for the first time, both of which concealed the bruises. It was then that Alice realized Ree despised her. As for her mother, though she loved Alice, her attachment to the comfortable lifestyle provided by her husband meant she would always side with Ree. Meanwhile, the man no longer concealed his disdain for his stepdaughter, and Alice became a frequent target for his rage, with any minor infraction serving as an excuse. A poor grade, a teacher's remark, a broken plate, or a disheveled room. Sometimes, Ray didn't even need a reason. It used to happen that he came home in a turmoil mood, and then the hated Alice came into view. "He must be insane," the girl stated, looking directly into the camera. "I believe he enjoys hitting me. His eyes actually light up with joy. It's terrifying. I fear that he might cross a line and end my life one day." Alice's mother witnessed all this, but never attempted to safeguard her daughter. After each incident, Kathleen would console Alice. "He's doing this for your own good. He's afraid you'll become unruly. This is just his way of parenting. All loving parents discipline their children for their betterment. You should be grateful that Ree cares so much." However, Alice found no reason for joy. For a time, she even believed that this was normal since she never had a father figure before. Maybe that's how fathers raise their children. Maybe every one of her classmates feels the same way. Ree tried to hit Alice in places where it would not leave visible marks. If that wasn't possible, Alice would wear long-sleeved clothing and pants to school to conceal the evidence of abuse. "No one must know what happened yesterday," Kathleen warned her daughter. "Otherwise, everyone will know what a bad girl you are since Daddy had to punish you." Alice believed her mother. She hid her scars and bruises out of shame. However, one day, a medical examination at school revealed the visible marks from a recent beating. The young nurse was appalled by the marks on Alice's body. "What happened to you? Where did these come from?" he asked. I fell down the stairs," Alice mumbled, offering the first excuse that came to mind. As long as she kept the truth hidden, maybe no one would realize how bad she was. "She's a hyperactive child," the teacher in the medical room confirmed. "She's always getting into some sort of trouble." Alice's stepfather continued to take out his anger on her as she grew older, while her mother Kathleen silently consented. For a time, Alice considered this life normal. However, as she got older and learned from her classmates, movies and books, she realized her situation was not normal. Alice grew smarter and wiser. One day, she understood what was happening to her was wrong and must not be tolerated. "I went to the principal and filed a complaint in his office. I told them everything, even showed them my bruises and abrasions. They said they'd look into everything. I was so hopeful. I thought this nightmare was over, but it got worse," Alice confessed. The principal turned to her stepfather, and he dismissed Alice's claims as the ramblings of a disturbed mind. He said they had already arranged for her to see a psychiatrist. The principal believed him. Alice was indeed taken to see psychiatrists. She suspected these doctors were paid off by her stepfather. As a result, a perfectly healthy child was diagnosed with a mental disorder, and everything Alice said was dismissed as nonsense. "He has complete control over me. I've become his official whipping girl," Alice lamented. Alice was permanently removed from school and began homeschooling, studying with teachers online. "You ungrateful child, now there's no one to complain about the man who raises, feeds, and clothes you," Ree taunted, looking at his bewildered stepdaughter. This was a turn of events Alice hadn't expected when she told the principal the truth. She felt like a prisoner in her own beautiful home, isolated from all but her mother, servants, and stepfather. She was presented as an abnormal individual to others. To make matters worse, her internet access was cut off, severing her last connection to the outside world through social media. It was total isolation. However, Ree and Kathleen maintained the facade of being perfect parents. They took Alice on trips and occasionally brought her to cafes or restaurants. They made public appearances with her to avoid arousing suspicion. The physical abuse continued. Ray vented all his anger and tension on Alice. Each time he went further but never touched her face, as facial injuries were harder to conceal. Kathleen remained silent, not just to appease her husband but also out of fear. All the beatings and abuse were directed at his daughter. Who knows, perhaps if it were not for this lightning rod, she herself would have to pay for the beautiful, nourished life. I left messages wherever I could. Alice's voice began to tremble. I tried to ask for help, but it was useless. They thought I was insane. One day, Ree caught me trying to tell a woman in the street. We were on vacation in Thailand at the time. He came up, showed this lady a medical certificate with a diagnosis, and then beat me so badly that I passed out. I spent the rest of my vacation bedridden. They would lock me up and leave for the beach. I thought I was going to die, even wanted to, but I survived and regained consciousness. Oh, darling, you've been through so much. Debbie couldn't contain herself. He's growing more and more irate. I think he's losing his mind. Soon, Ray will kill me and make it look like an accident. He has enough money and connections to do that.
I'm terrified.
I really want to leave, but there's no way out. If I escape, they'll bring me back. You're my last chance to speak up. Please help me. Debbie stopped the tape, looking at the girl with both pity and tenderness. She wished she could immediately get her out of this terrifying situation. I'll do anything to get you out of here, the woman promised. A sudden idea came to her. Alice, darling, why don't we take pictures of your bruises and scars? Show them to me. Alice nodded briefly. She hastily rolled up the sleeves of her sweater and rolled up her pants. A horrific sight of bruises, cuts, and abrasions was revealed to Deb's astonished eyes. The girl's entire body, hidden under her clothes, was covered with wounds and scars of different healing stages. Alice lifted her sweater, revealing a large bruise with yellowing edges on her stomach. Debbie gasped. Her hands trembled, but she videotaped everything. The nightmare that the girl was living through was horrifying to imagine. I'm going to the police. I'm going to the station right now, the woman assured the young girl. Thank you, the girl smiled. You're the first person to believe me. I just hope the police don't blame it on my diagnosis, because Ree once convinced the maid who saw the cuts on my hands that it was me, that my own illness caused me to harm myself. The man I'm going to now will believe it. He has children himself. He'll understand. Nolan reviewed the video multiple times, his face cycling through a range of emotions from bewilderment to surprise, then anger. What a scumbag, he thought to himself. Debbie, go home now. I need to assemble a team and get the guardianship authorities involved, as well as medics. Don't worry, I'll keep you updated. Are you going over there immediately? No, these things take time, but we'll get her out. We'll rescue her soon. Debbie drove home, where, comforted by her beloved cats, she finally let her emotions loose. She sobbed uncontrollably, shaking in fear for Alice. She couldn't comprehend Alice's mother's actions. How could anyone tolerate their child being treated so poorly? Catherine had been blessed with such a treasure, a beautiful, intelligent daughter, but she failed to appreciate this gift and behaved horribly. Fortunately, everything turned out well for Alice. Nolan later updated Debbie on how the events unfolded. He even visited her home to fill her in. It felt strange to see him back in that apartment. Alice was initially just taken to the hospital. Ray Littman claimed that his daughter had self-inflicted the injuries because of her diagnosis. He again tried to portray his stepdaughter as mad. The guardianship officers and the police did not argue with him. They just said that the girl should be evaluated well and placed temporarily in another place since the parents can't handle a sick child. They also promised that as soon as the girl's condition stabilizes, she will be returned to the family. Ray Littman, worried, tried to threaten, offered money. He realized how it would all end. The man knew perfectly well that his stepdaughter is absolutely normal, mentally healthy child. This fact was quickly confirmed at the hospital. Alice had no psychiatric diagnosis whatsoever. Examination of the wounds on the teenager's body showed that it was physically impossible for the girl to inflict such injuries on herself, so someone else did it. Who? If we could consider that Alice all the time was within the walls of the house, the answer was self-evident. The victim gave her testimony, detailing how and when she received her bruises and cuts from the abrasion. Ray Littman was immediately taken into custody. The police officers were eager to hold the mother accountable as she was, in essence, complicit in this terrible crime. However, Kathleen managed to evade punishment. She claimed that she lived in constant fear of her husband and kept silent to avoid exacerbating the situation. While her claim might be partly true, Kathleen was merely a witness in this high-profile case. However, the guardianship authorities initiated the process to revoke her parental rights because of the danger Alice faced around her. She never once reported Ed, her spouse's actions, or defended her daughter, which provided substantial grounds for this action. Alice was placed in an orphanage. Debbie, who often visited her, noted that the girl seemed quite content and satisfied with her life. "It's nice here. It's peaceful. I can study. I can communicate with other children, walk in the yard. We are taken on excursions, and most importantly, I don't have to be afraid. I don't have to be afraid that Ree, who came from work angry and upset about something, will drag me out of bed and beat me up. It's such a blessing." Debbie could barely hold back her tears. What kind of life has a girl if she's happy in an orphanage? They quickly made friends with everyone. Alice was an incredibly bright and cheerful person despite her many trials. Debbie wanted to help Alice forget that horror and give her a happy childhood. Nolan was the first to know about Debbie's decision. She called him to figure out how to proceed. "You know, I'm not surprised," said the former spouse. "I knew that sooner or later you would come to this, and I'm pleased for the girl." "So, you're going to help me pull this off, Debbie?" asked, "because I really don't know where to start." "I'll assist you with the adoption," Nolan promised. "I have acquaintances who can expedite the process. The key is Alice's agreement, but I don't foresee any issues with that, do you?"
No, Debbie confidently replied.
The September morning was dull yet sunny. For the first time in a while, this date held significance for Debbie. She was sending her daughter off to 7th grade. Together, they had selected new school clothes for Alice. The shopping trip was lengthy as they sought items that would fit Alice perfectly, but they managed. "Alice, get up. We're going to be late for your first day at a new school," Debbie exclaimed, checking her watch. The smell of fresh toast and coffee wafted from the kitchen. "It's time for breakfast." "Good morning," the girl greeted, smiling as she emerged from the bedroom. She looked glad, and there were no more bruises or abrasions on her arms and legs. The scars from deep cuts served as the only reminders of the nightmare that existed outside their beautiful mansion. Many of these scars were dispersed across her body, but time would eventually smooth and erase them. Alice approached Debbie and hugged her as she always did. Their needs were perfectly complementary. The girl found a loving, understanding mother, while the woman gained a beautiful, grateful daughter. Kathleen attempted to reconnect with Alice. She caught her, even showed up at her school. However, the girl harbored resentment, misunderstanding, and anger towards her mother. But psychologists worked with the girl. At first, Debbie took her foster daughter to sessions every day, but now the visits were reduced to once a week. Alice's psychological trauma was deep, her emotional wounds more severe than her physical ones. The goal was for Alice to forgive Kathleen, a step necessary for her own healing and well-being. They still had a long journey ahead, but together they could overcome it. After all, they were stronger together. Thank you for joining us today on Deep Stories. Be sure to like, subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next video.